veterans and employment. And before I get started, of course, I want to remind everybody out there in live stream land, please tune in. And on the way over here today, I was thinking, why do we care about veterans employment? Why is this an issue? Less than 1% of Americans serve in the military. And so in the grand scheme of things, it's a fairly small sector of the American workforce that we're talking about. But I think the reason why we care about it, and I think the reason why everybody up here cares about it, is because we have, even though it's a small percentage of the American population, a group of men and women who are go-getters, who have obviously volunteered to serve their country. And it's in America's interest to reintegrate them into society, to tap into that go-getter energy, if you will, not just to drive the American economy, but also as a way to kind of pay them back for the service that they have given the country, to make sure that when they come back from the battlefield, that they feel like they're welcomed back into society, they're treated as sort of a full-fledged member. So let's get started. Let me introduce our amazing panel here. First, to my left, Melissa Bryant. Melissa is a former Army captain, intelligence officer, and is currently and if I get this wrong, correct me, Director of Political and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, which, as many of you know, is sort of the leading post-9/11 veteran service organization. Unfortunately, our other panelist, who was supposed to be next, Philip Carter, had to leave for another event. He sends his regards. But sitting next to Melissa is Eric Eversole. Eric is also former military, a former JAG officer in the Navy, is still a commander in the Navy Reserve, and he runs what I think is a very interesting effort called Hiring Our Heroes, which is run out of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And we're looking forward to hearing a lot about what the private sector is doing in this regard. And last but not least, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who is also an Iraq War veteran, member of the House Armed Services Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And I shouldn't mention this, but we are Politico, and some people are also mentioning as a possible presidential candidate in 2020. She's probably not going to say anything about that. But thank you for joining us, and obviously you found gainful employment. Probably the best gainful employment there is. But we're excited to hear about what you can tell us about what you're seeing on Capitol Hill, what you see the Congress's role in helping veterans find employment. And so maybe we can start off with just some statistics. I mean, there's 20 million veterans in America. And the good news is that, at least according to the Department of Labor, the unemployment rate among veterans is only 2.6%. And that's as of last month, which is a pretty dramatic drop, at least 2 percentage point drop from the year before. So, Melissa, you look at that number and you think, wow, the battle's been won. I mean, so tell us, have we tackled the issue of finding veterans employment and like I said, tapping into that particularly unique set of individuals?
There's been progress, tremendous progress. However, among post-9/11 veterans in particular, that rate is actually higher. It's 3.6% for post-9/11 vets. Women like Congresswoman Gabbard and myself often have trouble transitioning, and the unemployment and the underemployment rate is higher for women veterans. And so there's still a lot of work to be done as IAVA calls it, she who born the battle. And there's a lot, I think, that we can do through government, through public-private partnerships, and even right in companies' HR departments to recognize the value of hiring veterans in order to help close that gap.
Eric, so from your perspective, where are these gaps? Melissa talks about the overall numbers being good, but if you look sort of a little bit deeper, you find pockets, whether it's women, whether it's minorities, that are still struggling. Where do you see the cracks?
I think the numbers actually mask some really significant challenges that we see, especially with our transitioning service member population. We released a survey last year, and what we saw was that of transitioning service members, nearly half of them will spend 4 or more months unemployed before they find their first job. And then inevitably, they take the first job they can find for a paycheck, and then 44% of those service members will leave that first job within a year, and the number one reason as to why they left that job was because they took it simply for a paycheck. So there's significant inefficiency from a workforce development perspective that these young men and women, many of whom come from low and middle income families, want to serve their country, are looking for better economic opportunity in their lives, and they're not necessarily finding it immediately in that first year or two after service. So from our perspective, we need to do a better job of getting left of transition, helping to connect those service members with careers before they get out, and put them on that pathway to economic opportunity that they so richly deserve.
Brian, if I may, I'd like to dovetail on his point in that at IAVA, we found in our most recent member survey that 90% of our members had trouble transitioning and were underemployed, to back up his point. So it really is a challenge in terms of transition.
You talk about left of transition. Congressman, maybe you can touch on this. You know, I think it's interesting. A couple of years back, I worked on a project where I had discovered, and I was a little bit surprised by it, that if you were a general or admiral in the military and you were getting ready to retire, there was a whole series of programs to basically help them transition to the private sector. I mean, they literally would lock them in a resort in San Diego, teach them how to write a resume, how to put on a tie, how to present yourself, how to do an interview. And I was struck by that, but I don't think there's anything really akin to that for the lower ranks. So tell me from your experience, you know, what does the Pentagon do right in preparing members to sort of to leave the service and go back into society, and what do they do wrong, or what are they not doing at all?
Yeah, you know, this is something that's constantly evolving and constantly growing, and lessons learned. I think especially in the post 9/11 generation of veterans, as they're seeing more awareness built around this. You know, there are programs, the Transition Assistance Program, which is kind of the most common one that everyone has to go through. It's mandatory for service members who are leaving the service to go through this process. But, you know, there's a difference between, for those of us who've been in the military, you can check the block and say, okay, I went through the PowerPoint slides and I'm out of here, versus something that's real and meaningful and tangible that'll set someone up for success. There are some programs like the Soldier for Life program that seek to do that they start to work with a service member months, even a year before they know that they're going to get out of the military, say, okay, what is it you're interested in doing? What other additional education or training do you need in order to do that? And then they're even partnering with some private sector companies so that this soldier will have the time allotted from their commander. The commanders are a part of this process to be able to go and actually begin training or begin interning or working at that business, so they can literally walk out the door on Friday from the military, lay down the uniform, and walk in to a new civilian job on Monday. So I think that's kind of the model that we need to be moving more towards. This has been a pilot program only at a few bases in the country, but I think this is the kind of thing that we need more of.
Yeah, and can I just quickly add to that? Because we actually, I mean, I think what the Soldier for Life, especially on the Army side, as well as the services, you know, they've done a great job over the last couple of years of doing private-public partnerships, of bringing trusted leaders. We did over 20 events on base this year. We actually ran our corporate fellowship program for transitioning service members at 10 locations this year. 83% of our fellows were hired. Amazon's been a great participant of that program, but 83% were hired before they got off of active duty, and the average starting salary is $77,000. So these are programs that work and work well when there's a demand signal or an opportunity for private-public partnerships, and we've seen that, and we've been fortunate to.
I think a lot of it is getting the buy-in from the first-line leaders within the chain of command, and that's what we found when Hiring Our Heroes came out to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. They made it mandatory for everyone from E5s to captains in the company commands to go and show up, to be able to be aware of these are the resources that are available to your soldiers, so that they can not only make them aware, but also make sure that they have time to avail themselves of those resources.
And that time is critical.
Exactly.
That commander's discretion really does come into play in allowing for soldiers to do that. And to your point of making veterans, or rather transitioning soldiers, more marketable, one of the things that I know the Transition Assistance Program and programs like Soldier for Life for the Army and the Marine Corps programs are focusing on resume writing and helping not just the officers, not just the senior brass, but also the enlisted to learn how to market their transferable skill sets and bring that into the civilian sector.
Let's talk a little bit about skills. And I know this has come up a lot on this issue, but I think there's this perception, at least among some in the private sector, that, you know, if you're coming out of the military, I think as we were talking earlier, Congresswoman, you're a soldier, you fire guns, that's what you do. But obviously, serving in the military is very different. There's a much broader set of skills that you could learn, and as you're pointing out, translating that in the search for a job can be a challenge. But I'm also wondering, you know, Amazon probably is the best example of the 21st century sort of economy. The Pentagon, the military, in many respects, is still an industrial age organization. I mean, obviously, it has a lot of high-tech people, high-tech systems, but I'm wondering, is there enough training, and what more can be done on the training side or the education side to make sure that people who come out of the military have the skills to market themselves to some of these bigger IT companies?
I think I'll kick this off. You know, when you were starting your conversation here about why are we talking about this, you talked about the country's debt that's owed to our veterans. But I think the other half of this is what a great asset veterans are to the country as a whole, but what an asset veterans are to the private sector as well, to our communities. Just talking with some of the Amazon leadership when I got here this morning, they were talking about how hiring veterans is good for business, and being able to change that perception that you just spoke about. Well, veterans are people who come and they only know how to, you know, fire guns. There is this leadership ability of mission first, discipline, working as a member of a team, making decisions under pressure and getting the job done, that whether you're an infantry platoon sergeant or you're a supply sergeant or you are an intelligence officer, that kind of span across the board, that are transferable when you look across the different sectors in the private industry.
And I would actually take a step back. I mean, I think sometimes when we first started our efforts, we were just trying to help them find jobs because unemployment was so high. As we've reshaped our program, we focus more on the education aspect of it, helping them understand what real economic opportunity looks like in this country. And I think the step back we need to take is we need to understand where these young men and women are often coming from. 88% come from low and middle income families. They're coming from blue collar backgrounds. And the reality is that their parents, and it was certainly my case growing up in a small town in Indiana, one of two options. You're going to join the military or you're going to go to college. That's the only way you're going to get ahead in life. And so I think the businesses have been really successful that we've seen have been able to help young service members understand what real economic opportunity looks like in their industry and their business, and then a pathway to success within that business, and then provide just a little bit of training to help them get over the hump to really launch their career. I mean, a great company that's doing great work in this space, Microsoft and their Skills Academy, they do a 6-month training right before service members get out, and they're all getting hired. And it's a tremendous program, but that's what I would start. You just got to understand where they're coming from.
And I'd also add that service members already have training. One of the biggest challenges that IAVA members have reported to us is that credentialing, licenses. If you're a truck driver in the military, does that transfer necessarily to a CDL, a commercial driver's license, to where you can drive trucks? And that's from state to state. And there's been a lot of, at first there were a lot of challenges. We've made a lot of progress through Department of Labor programs and Department of Transportation, and providing those credentials and licenses, for example, for CDLs, where you can take that transferable skill that you already received in the military and immediately walk into a job. Another complementary benefit that everyone has when they leave military service is the GI Bill. The GI Bill is the single most best benefit that you have in order to build on that training, whether it's going to college or maybe it's even apprenticeships. and being able to take what you took in the did in the military and build upon that, do an apprenticeship, especially for those who are coming from blue-collar backgrounds, and then maybe take that even to their hometown.
We've talked a lot, or a good bit, about that sort of linkage between when you get out of the military and you try to find your place in the private sector. What about the veterans that are already in the workforce but are underemployed? Maybe they're a little bit older. They don't have some of the skills that maybe are most marketable. Is that a place where not enough attention is being focused? Because you see 2.6% overall unemployment, but how many of those jobs are minimum wage jobs? How many of those jobs are not something that's really going to get them ahead economically?
I would start off by saying that's absolutely correct, and I think that there's ways in which you can piecemeal toward a pathway to career success when you're underemployed. And I already cited that women tend to be the ones who are most underemployed, unfortunately. For example, through the gig economy, there are ways in which you can use those transitional tools, if you will, in order to, whether you're driving for Uber, whether you're a babysitter on care.com, whether there's, and I'm sure Amazon and other corporations have entities in which you can use the gig economy in order to use that as a bridge, but that's not meant to be a permanent solution. And to your earlier point of those who are taking the first job they're offered, but then staying there, that's the problem. You need to use that, but with the supplement of the GI Bill. Use your GI Bill benefit so that you can go to school or receive the training that you need in order to take yourself to the next level.
Let's talk about the GI Bill. And obviously that's been by and large, very successful program. The post 9/11 GI Bill, created by Congress. I know there's other legislation in the works.
It's already passed.
No, but other, like the Vets Tech Bill is sort of kind of an add-on to that. In other words, applying the same sort of benefits, but if you wanted to go to vocational technical school, you mentioned sort of the more blue-collar kind of employment. Congresswoman, is that something, the Vets Tech Bill, that you think, number one, will pass? And how much of an impact would that have?
I think the Vet Tech Bill is a great example. There's another bill that I worked on with Congresswoman Martha McSally that deals with the apprenticeships, that opens up those doors of opportunity for veterans to be able to use their GI Bill for apprenticeships. These are important things that I think that we need to press the leadership to bring to the floor for a vote, to be able to augment the traditional college, four-year college degree education that the GI Bill generously offers. Because of this constantly changing and evolving economy, we have to recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach for a veteran's education and the skills and tools they need to be successful doesn't work for everyone. And for some people, going the apprenticeship route is going to make sense. Going the tech route, even looking at, hey, how do I get access to startup funds? This is something that I've heard from veterans saying, what if I don't want to go to college, but I've earned this education benefit and I want to put it as funds towards a startup, small business. I think these kinds of creative ideas towards this new economy that we're dealing with should be really addressed by Congress and making sure that we're in touch with the private sector as we do this.
Eric, we hear a lot about companies like Amazon, Bank of America, Walmart, sort of big companies that have really leaned forward in trying to hire veterans. But most Americans work for small businesses, not for big businesses. Is there a disconnect there, or is there sort of a missing piece of the puzzle? In other words, where not mom and pop, but the company with 50 people in some small town, where they can be engaged a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that I've seen small business step up across the country. We certainly saw as we were going from nearly 10% unemployment down to where it is now. I mean, 70% of those folks are getting hired by small and medium-sized businesses. So they're certainly out there doing a great job. The real challenge for small businesses is they don't have these large HR departments, and they have to typically recruit in their local market. And the reality is service members are often stationed far away from where they'll ultimately live and call home. And so how do we make it easier for those small businesses to recruit at faraway locations is something that we certainly work on through some digital platforms. But the other thing I would add, and this is where I think we've seen some great companies like USAA who have become even more sophisticated in their recruiting approach. They're not only saying, hey, look, we're going to hire veterans, we're going to hire a lot of them, but we're going to make sure our supply chain does as well. And that's helped to really motivate small businesses, get out, look at veteran candidates as a good, viable option, and it's made a big difference.
And we only have a few more minutes here. We could go on, but maybe I'll ask the three of you if there was one thing, a policy idea, a request to corporate America, one thing that if you could wave your wand, that you think would really, dramatically make it easier for that connection between service and civilian life, what would it be? Maybe Melissa, we can just go down the line.
I would say that it needs to be the recognition of veterans as an asset to the workforce. It's a return on investment when you hire veterans. And there's so much that we bring to the table in terms of our, not just the skill sets that we learned while we were on active duty or in the Guard or Reserve, but also what we can bring to the table in terms of leadership and in terms of our organizational skills and those sort of soft skills that are sometimes lacking in the workplace. There needs to be a recognition by corporate HR and even small business hiring managers. It needs to be recognized in federal government, and it needs to be also recognized in even the nonprofit sector, where you can see the value of bringing veterans into the workspace and what we can do for you.
I'm going to throw a little bit of a hand grenade in the conversation. We got to fix the military spouse employment issue or unemployment issue. Military spouses still face 16% unemployment, notwithstanding what the veteran unemployment rate is. It's a widespread issue. Military spouses, 93% are women. Military families tend to be, from a dual income perspective, the same place that Americans were in the mid-1990s. So we're 20 plus years behind. And the reason, there's lots of reasons this matters, but one of the primary impacts is the fact that military families are deciding to leave the military because of the lack of two income opportunities. So I see this as a real national security issue that we have to get serious about, especially on the business side and from the overall company side.
I'm going to double down on what Melissa said, because I think this is really the key in recognizing that veterans are an asset to our country. We understand, what does it mean to be a veteran? People say, how can we help veterans make this successful transition? It's recognizing that veterans are the few people in our country who make that decision to put service before self in the most ultimate way, where it means you may lay your life down for this country. So when you think about that quality in a person, and it is about leadership, but it is about servant leadership, and how that translates, yes, to civic engagement and volunteerism, but how that translates to leadership in the private sector is incredible. And the more our private sector recognizes that asset, the more we can solve this problem.
Well, with that, I want to thank our panel again, and thank you in the audience. I'm struck, Eric, by the military spouse issue that you bring up. I wish we had had more time to talk about that, because it seems like, wow, that just compounds the whole problem, especially in an economy where mom and dad, husband and wife, both have to work. So maybe that's for the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank
and
you.
Thank
have
you.
a great day.